and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a returning viewer. I'm Maisie, and this is Maisie with a Z, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in October. So this was a really good reading month for me. I read 21 books and 6,599 pages. So, you know, I'm very impressed with myself. Before that, the most books I'd read in a month in 2023 was 17 books in April. So, you know, this was a good step up from that. 5 of the books were poetry books, so like much shorter than a regular book. But, you know, the other 16 books were all regular books. I'm proud of myself is what I'm saying. And another thing I'm proud of myself about is that I read every single book on my October TBR. So all of the like eerie, witchy, spooky books that I'd wanted to read in October, I did read in October. So that's another thing I'm impressed with myself about, because I'm not so good at the follow-through on reading my monthly TBRs. Yeah, I mean, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the actual books I read this month. So the first book I read was Spells for Lost Things by Jenna Evans Welch. This basically follows this girl named, I want to say Willow, has been raised by her mother and has never really known much about like her mother's childhood. And one day her mother tells her that the mother's twin sister just died, and so they need to go help prepare the house for selling it. So they go to Salem, Massachusetts, and our main character kind of uncovers this like family history that her mother's trying to keep hidden from her, about like a family curse and being descended from witches. And I really liked that mystery part. There was like a romance going on that was like, it was pretty cute. It wasn't amazing. It was pretty cute. And then it's also told in dual POV with the love interest whose name is Mason. And I don't know, it was just a strange book because the plot was clearly about Willow's family, and then it's kind of unclear how Mason was functioning there other than being the love interest. It didn't feel like he needed a POV necessarily. Like, he had his own things going on with his, like, he's lived in the foster care system most of his life and doesn't really know where his mother is, and he is taken in by one of his mother's like childhood friends. Like, he has his own stuff going on, but it doesn't fit in with the witch plotline super well. So I don't know. It was pretty decent. If you want like a witchy book that doesn't actually have much like fantasy elements in it, then I think this would be good for you, because it's very much just contemporary romance. And I did give this 3.5 stars. After that, I read The Ghost of Rose Hill by R.M. Romero. And I was not expecting to enjoy this book. For one, I didn't know it was a novel in verse until Sorry, I just turned off the fan. I realized I forgot to do that earlier. But I didn't know The Ghost of Rose Hill was a novel in verse until I picked it up. So that was a fun little surprise, considering I don't like novels told in verse very much. But here, I mean, it was fine. It's just with this and basically every other novel I ever read in this format, I'm like, being told in verse is not necessary. They don't usually make that great use of poetical language or anything, so it just feels kind of pointless. This was a kind of interesting story about a girl who's sent to live with her aunt in Prague, and she kind of uncovers this ghostly side to Prague when she begins cleaning up an old like Jewish graveyard. There's demons and like ghosts and possession and weird magic violin things, and it's kind of fun. There's a romance between her and a ghost, which I always find a little questionable. Cassandra Clare managed to swing it in the last hours, but other than that, I never quite vibe with it. I mean, it's fine. It was well written. It was a good time. I don't think I'd reread it, but if you like books told in verse, then I think you would love it. And I don't know, if you like ghost stories that aren't actually that scary, then I think this is probably good for you. And I gave The Ghost of Rose Hill 4 stars. And then I read The Late Mrs. Willoughby by Claudia Gray. This is the sequel to The Murder of Mr. Wickham. It's basically, these stories follow the daughter of Catherine Morland and Mr. Tilney from Northanger Abbey, and the son of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. And they like team up and solve mysteries, and it's so fun. Jonathan Darcy is so autistic coded, but you know, it's sent long before that was a diagnosis. And I don't know, I love it. I think this was worse than the first one because it's very Sense and Sensibility centered. because it takes place in that town, whereas the first book had like the main characters from every Jane Austen novel. So this is definitely less fun than the first one, but it's still a good time. Good mystery. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was disappointed in was like, I wish the romance had been there more. I'm hoping there's plans for a third book. If there is, I don't think it's been announced. But like, I want them to get together. Like, I love them so much. Like, these protagonists are so good, and like, anyway. I did give it 4 stars because there were a couple of like the twists that I thought were a little predictable, and I just don't like Sense and Sensibility that much, so having an entire novel set around Sense and Sensibility characters, not my favorite thing. That's what I have to say about The Late Mrs. Willoughby. I really hope there's going to be a third book in the series, but if there is, I don't think it's been announced yet. And then I read Down Comes the Night by Alison Saft. I actually read this on audiobook while I was doing an art project. This is billed as a kind of like gothic horror fantasy type thing, and I was very surprised. It's a much more typical YA fantasy than I would have expected, where it's these 2 characters from rival kingdoms are kind of in like forced proximity at this kind of eccentric nobleman's house, and they kind of like learn to trust each other and uncover like the truth behind what's happening in their kingdoms and in like the nobleman's kingdom. And I don't know, it's a little predictable, but the romance was cute. And our main character's bi, so she's like in love with her female best friend at the beginning, but then she falls for the male love interest. And I don't know, I love some good bi rep. I don't know, it was a good time. I did really like the romance. It is a bit predictable. The world building was really interesting. Our 2 protagonists, like 2 kingdoms, both have magic, and they've been warring with each other for centuries. And then the nobleman whose house they're staying at, his kingdom doesn't have any magic, and so it like innovates a lot of technology and such, and it's just a really interesting world building dynamic, and I don't know, I think that was really well done. So I did give this 4 stars, even though I found it like a little predictable. It also got a little repetitive in the middle. But yeah, it was a good time. I liked it more than I was expecting to, because I didn't think I was going to enjoy this. And then I read The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and this series has been all over everywhere for like the past several years. And I finally picked it up, and I enjoyed it. I don't particularly care about any of the characters or the romance or anything, but like I love some good like puzzle-based mysteries are my jam. So I really enjoyed that. Having our main characters running around this like billionaire's house trying to solve the puzzles he created before his death, like that's fun. I'm going to pick up the next book in the series. I could definitely see myself getting tired of this just because I don't know if I will ever care about any of the characters. But as long as the puzzles are there keeping me entertained, then I'll keep reading the series. So I gave this 4 stars. Is it the best written thing ever? No. Is it exactly what I wanted it to be? Absolutely yes. I see why it's popular, but like when I compare it to my favorite YA mystery series, which is Truly Devious, it's not nearly as good. The characters are worse. The like mystery, if you can call it that, isn't as interesting. I will probably pick up the second book soonish, maybe next month. And yeah, that's my thought on The Inheritance Games. And then I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and this is the cozy fantasy romance that's been all over everywhere, every book, social media for I'd say the past year. It's about our main character Viv, who has been in, it's like kind of a D&D inspired world. She's been in this adventuring party for years, and she finally quits and decides to start a coffee shop because she wants like a change of like lifestyle. And so it's literally just following her. She starts up this coffee shop, and there's a lot of found family. It's about friendship and connection and building community, and it's just so cozy. And I know this has become such a comfort read for me because I already want to reread it. It feels like being in front of a warm fire with like a blanket and tea, and it's just so good. Like, if you like cozy books, then you should absolutely read this because it's just chill. I don't know, it was so cute. And you know, I love a good sapphic romance, so I appreciated that, even though like, it's not a huge element of the story. Legends and Lattes, absolute 5 stars. Would definitely recommend it. Like, I can't help but smile when I'm talking about it because it's just that good and that cute. I didn't want it to end. And then I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I ended up giving 4 stars. This, if you don't know, it's a classic. It was written like the 1930s. It definitely got gothic vibes, but I don't know how to describe this. It's basically our narrator, whose name we never find out, marries this widower who is like a couple decades older than her. His wife died in a boating accident a couple years previously. And so she ends up moving into his house, and she's kind of perpetually living in the shadow of Rebecca, who is his former wife. I don't know, it's eerie and it's so interesting and so well written. Like, I can't quite say why I gave it 4 stars because it's definitely very well written. I might just be, I didn't like the husband, and the main character's kind of stupid sometimes. Like, her naivete is like intentional, but I think it's a bit overdone sometimes. Yeah, it's so interesting, and it's such a good, like, if any of this sounds remotely interesting to you, I'd definitely check it out. Like, there's a reason it's classic. It is very well written. Yeah, this is one of those books I just don't really know what to say about it. It was very good. There's something that wasn't quite there for me to bring it to 5 stars. And then I read Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas, which was a reread, and it was 5 stars when I originally read it, and it was still a 5-star read for me this time. I love the Throne of Glass characters so much. I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's in the middle of the series. There's definitely like spoiler territory, but it's so good. The Throne of Glass series, it starts out good, but it's just slowly building up, and Queen of Shadows is just amazing. And I'm currently about halfway through Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Queen of Shadows ends up being my favorite Throne of Glass book because it's just so good. Like, it's perfect. It's wrapping up a lot of things that are established in the first half of the series, and I don't know, I just love our main character so much. I love all our other characters. It's just, Throne of Glass is so good. And then I read A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals. This book was just charming and funny, and it's this kind of parody of murder mystery tropes and Regency tropes, and like, it's so self-aware as a parody. It doesn't take itself remotely seriously, and it's just so fun. So yeah, our main girl Beatrice is like a Regency true crime addict, where she sneaks there's this crime column in the newspaper that she like sneakily reads all the time, and she's obsessed. There's this celebrity detective in London who she reads everything he does, but it's basically like the rules of this like particular very small town are such that if she was found out, then like she would be completely socially ruined, would completely socially ruin her family. And then this book kind of takes place over the course of one night or so when they're at a ball and someone gets murdered. She knows a lot about murder investigation from reading these like true crime reports obsessively, but she can't let on to anyone that anyone knows that. And there's still all these like Regency, like, I want to say Regency tropes, but like Regency romance tropes. I don't even want to say Jane Austen, but think Bridgerton but more toned down. I don't know, it is so fun, and it's such a quick read. I mean, I thought the mystery was like, okay, no, I thought the main mystery is a little predictable, but there's a lot of like side little things that get uncovered that I like, a lot of them I was not expecting. And yeah, it's just fun. Like, if you like Regency settings or murder mysteries or just like very funny like parody books, then you will adore this. I gave it 4 stars because I would have liked a little more, I don't know, I found it a little more predictable than I would have liked, and I wish the characters had been a little less one-dimensional, where like, because it's such a parody, then their one-dimensionality is a little, like, definitely intentional, but I wish there'd been a little more personality and depth to them. And yeah, that was a really good read. Then I read Ghostwood Song by Erica Waters, and I gave this 3.5 stars. I actually enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I would. Where, as I talked about in my TBR for October, this was like, I impulse bought this like a couple years ago when it came out, and regretted it because it really doesn't sound like something I would like. It's this girl whose father died and he had this bone fiddle, I think. I might be mixing up stories because I just read Sophie and the Bone Song, which also has a bone lute. Okay, I think there is a bone fiddle. So her father had been able to call up ghosts. She keeps trying to call up her father's ghost and has never really been successful. And then one day her stepfather is murdered and her brother is accused. And then she's trying to uncover what really happened because she doesn't believe her brother did it. And so that murder mystery is kind of the most of the plot of the book, but there's also a lot going on with like the ghosts of her family's past and such as she's trying to call up all these ghosts and uncover this mystery. Because as she's trying to uncover this, then a lot of other things come up with it. And yeah, it's a little more eerie than I would have liked, and creepy than I would have liked. But I did really enjoy the, like, Down Comes the Night. It's another bi love triangle where the main character is bi and then one of the love interests is a girl and one of them's a guy. And I think both this and Down Comes the Night handled that really well. And I'm so excited to see more, like, bi main characters in YA books. So yeah, I did enjoy this. I didn't like our main character and I didn't like most of the other characters that much. I did like the central romance, but I don't know. And I thought the mystery was all predictable. Like, I felt pretty sure who did it very early on, and I was right. It was pretty good for what it is. It's just not at all the type of book I would like. And so, like, even though I did enjoy it more than I thought I would, I still only gave it 3.5 stars because, like, I don't know if I'd choose to pick this up again. I don't know if I'd choose to pick up a book that was, like, billed as being similar to it. It's pretty decent. It just wasn't personally my thing. And then I read Cassandra Speaks by Elizabeth Lesser. This is a nonfiction book. Like, it bills itself as exploring, like, the stories of Eve and Pandora and Cassandra through the lens of what if women were the storytellers and examining how those stories impact culture. And that's what I was expecting. So I thought I was really going to enjoy it. I really should have just done more research before picking this book. Like, the author takes a very unacademic approach to all the stories and, like, very much just uses them in order to fit her argument and her self-empowerment narrative to a point that I'm like, as someone who's taken classics classes and is very interested in how stories and mythology impact our culture today, even if we no longer technically believe in them, I don't think she was doing a faithful job at actually examining that. And then the later parts of the book were not remotely related to that. And it was just so disappointing because it wasn't at all what I was hoping it was going to be and what I was expecting it was going to be. It's just a glorified self-help book. I really would not recommend it. Because even the self-help parts, I'm like, even if I were looking for a self-help book or a women empowerment book or whatever, I don't think it was saying much new. It would make vague allusions to intersectionality without actually doing any engagement with that. And it was just, like, it's written by a 70-year-old white woman. And I was like, given this take on feminism, I believe that. It was solid 2.5 stars. It wasn't the worst written thing I've ever read, but I would not recommend it. And then I read The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I gave this 5 stars, which I wasn't expecting to do, but it's this very gorgeous historical fiction, but it's set in, like, a world where magic is real and witches had, like, a strong influence on history. And anyway, it's set in 1893 amid the suffragist movement, and it's following these 3 sisters who have been kind of separated, but they're magically drawn together in New Salem, which is a town kind of, like, built from the rubble of old Salem, Massachusetts, when it was destroyed to try and eradicate witches. When they do this, they start kind of investigating, like, the old ways of witches because there's something kind of magical that drew them together that's kind of leading them to uncover a lot of magic that's been hidden, and meanwhile there's a bunch of forces that are trying to stop them from doing this. Like, I loved all 3 of the main characters. I loved the take on magic and witches. I loved the combination with the suffragist movement, and it was done in a way I think was really interesting. It was so good. It's just this beautiful story of, like, these 3 sisters, like, overcoming oppression, and I don't know, it's just lovely. And I really appreciated that it engaged with other social, like, it also engaged with, like, labor rights movements and with the way Black women were excluded from the suffragist movement, and one of the 3 sisters is queer. And if you remotely like witch stories, then you should absolutely read this because it's just stunning. and such care is put into every one of the characters, and they all have such distinct arcs, and they feel so human, and I just love all of them. Like I started out really not expecting to love this book, but I could not put it down. It's beautiful, and it's very thoughtfully done, and it builds such a rich world and such like a rich magic system without it feeling remotely overwhelming or complicated. It's built up very naturally, and you feel very much part of this world where like magic has always kind of been a thing, but it's been intentionally eradicated to take power away by people in power. And I don't know, it's a beautiful story. I highly recommend it. Absolute 5 stars. And then I read Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin, and I'd received an e-arc of this. It's a very typical YA story. It's this girl who lives on an island of witches. They have this deal with the mainlanders who don't have magic where they will only practice like safe, small magic that they're willing to like sell the products of to the mainlanders in exchange for protection. And meanwhile, there's this like knowledge that they used to practice like dark magic, but the understanding is they don't do that anymore, and no one knows how to do that. Our main girl Tana is the daughter of like one of the leaders of the coven, the witch coven. And she's basically been promised to the son of the mainland's governor, like since birth. Where it's always been expected she would leave the island, marry him in order to forge an official treaty between the mainland and the coven. But basically when Tana misses an important ritual that like helps the coven get rid of their excess power from only using the kind of small magic that they're allowed to use, then she ends up meeting this boy who claims to practice like the dark magic. She ends up learning it from him. Like, I'll be honest, I did not like the romance plot of this book. I did not like the love interest at all. But I really did enjoy the main plot being Tana's self-discovery and learning to choose happiness over just what's expected of her and what everyone has always told her she should do, and her realizing she shouldn't have to sacrifice everything she wants in life in order to appease those above her in the coven. And I did really enjoy her journey in that. I wish there had been more world building where there's some stuff that's just not explored in any real depth, and I did not care about the love interest at all. But other than that, fairly decent YA. Gave it 4 stars. Then I read The League of Gentlewoman Witches, which is by India Holton, and this was an absolute 5-star read where just like, this is like Legends and Lattes, where I'm like, this is absolutely going to be a comfort read for me. I was smiling the entire time I was reading it. It's set in the same world as Mysterious Society for Lady Scoundrels. It's set in the Victorian era of England, I think, but there are like pirates who have spells to make like houses fly, and so they kind of like just sail around England and they're flying houses trying to like stealing things. And then this book follows our main character Charlotte, who's a witch. So she practices a different type of magic than the pirates, but still set in the world with the pirates. It's kind of similar to Bring Me Your Midnight, where she's always been raised with the expectation she's going to take over the League of Witches, and so she's been expected to be perfect, and then she ends up like having to team up with this pirate named Alex O'Reilly. They're in this like kind of like forced partnership as they're trying to recover this magical artifact that's been stolen. It's just so fun, and I love their dynamic, and I love Charlotte. It's like Bring Me Your Midnight, where it's very much about Charlotte, like our main character, learning to choose her own happiness, and she doesn't have to exist to make other people happy. And it's just, I love it, and it has so many, like, the first book is mostly based on Bronte sister references because it's complicated, but Bramwell Bronte is a character in that story, whereas this book's largely based on Jane Austen references because Charlotte's like obsessed with her books. And it's just so fun. Like, it just makes me so happy. It's an absolute 5-star read. I don't know what else to say. It is so fun. I definitely recommend India Holton's books if you just like romance, or alternatively, if you kind of like romance but always wish there's like romance fantasy, then this is for you. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, India Holton's books are so fun. They don't take themselves remotely seriously, but they're just slightly absurd, but just lighthearted and fun without like sacrificing like the characters. And I don't know, I just adore them. I'm looking forward to picking up the 3rd book whenever I get the chance. And then we got 2 more books in poetry books. So then I read Just Lizzie by Karen Wilfred, And this was another e-arc I received. This came out in mid-November. But this is middle grade, and it's following our main character, Lizzie, whose life's been a lot of turmoil recently. She had to move across town from her childhood home after a dangerous incident with her neighbor. And there's all the usual middle school stuff, like friend dynamics changing, and meanwhile, she's undergoing this journey where she's discovering asexuality and realizes she thinks that she's asexual. I don't know, I'm so happy this exists. This book is just I know it's going to be so important to so many middle schoolers. It wasn't perfect, where the plot lines were a little messy, and I think the rep could have been a little clearer. But ultimately, it's introducing asexuality for what will likely be the first time for the vast majority of its readers. And I don't know, it does it in a very age-appropriate way, and it's lovely, and it's fundamentally about finding your community and finding the people who support you. I'm sure, I'm so happy this book exists. I gave it 4.5 stars, where I took up half a star just because the plot lines are a little messy. And I think a couple of characters could have been a little more rounded out, but ultimately, I'm just happy this book exists at all. If you're looking for asexuality rep, even if you don't usually read middle grade, I don't usually read middle grade, but if you're looking for good asexuality rep, then I would still definitely recommend this book. And then the last non-poetry book I read was A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. This book was just a disappointment because I wanted to love it. I really wanted to. The cover is gorgeous, and I was so interested in this tea ceremony-based magic system, and I was so hopeful. And then it was just not good. The romance plot was not remotely compelling, whereas the background of the story, but the love interest is just, I don't care about him. He was not interesting. And then there was the author was trying to do a lot of political intrigue and kind of complex government relationship things, but did not execute them really well. They were not explained well at all, and it should have been a lot clearer. But it was just hard to care about the plot when you're not really sure what's going on, because it's not explained very well. And I read a lot of fantasy, and I read a lot of complex fantasy, and this just wasn't explained very well. And the magic system, there was no explanation of it. We're supposed to accept it, but there's nothing about does any magic other than the tea-based magic exist, and why are only the tea makers able to have magic? I don't know. It's interesting. It should have been so good, but ultimately it just fell very flat for me. I'm giving it 2.5 stars. It's just not my fave. This was just disappointing. Finally, the 5 poetry books I read were Life in a Field by Katie Peterson, Show by Douglas Kearney, My Other Tongue by Rosa Alsala, Negro Mountain by C.S. Giscombe, and The Upstate by Lindsay Turner. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of those. Basically, I read these all for a class. The only one I gave a rating to was Life in a Field, which I gave 5 stars because it was absolutely beautiful and lovely and absolutely stunning. The other 4 I didn't give a rating because I don't read enough poetry to feel comfortable giving ratings to the books, because there are poems I like in here and poems I don't like. I just don't have enough of a system. I just didn't give them ratings. They were all pretty decent. I'd probably recommend them to anyone who likes poetry. I don't feel like I have enough of a knowledge of poetry in order to feel comfortable giving them a rating. Whereas Life in a Field follows more of a narrative, and it's a little more prosaic than the other ones, where it feels almost more like a novella than a poetry book. And so that's why I felt comfortable giving it a rating, and also just I loved it and wanted to express that. Those are all the books I read in October. So yeah, it was a mixed bag reading month, because I did read 2.5 star reads, but I also read quite a few 4-star reads and a handful of 5 stars. And yeah, I'm honestly surprised at how good this reading month was for me, considering I read a lot of books I really was not expecting to like that much, just because my TBR focused so much on kind of October-y books, which are just generally not my thing. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. So thank you so much if you stuck around to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. If you want to comment and tell me what you read in October, or just recently, since this isn't getting up until mid to late November. then I would love to see it. You can find me on my blog at ofpensandswords.com or on Goodreads or Storygraph at the links in my channel page. You can sometimes find me on Instagram at Of Pens and Swords, but I'm not there that often. I've been kind of like stepping back from Instagram for like mental health reasons, but you can still find me over there sometimes. And yeah, thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video, and I'll see you later.